and we'll proceed with a paper by Edward IRONS with a slightly different title as promised, I believe. But, yeah.
Okay, so Maitreya Great Dao. It's an Yiguandao offshoot that has succeeded in becoming an NRM, establishing its own identity. So today I want to explore for a while how this new religion emerged from the greater stream of Yiguandao, which I'll take a couple of minutes to explain. Quick agenda-wise, I'll give some background on Yiguandao. Then I'll talk about the precursor stage to the development and establishment of the Maitreya Great Dao. And I'll talk about this precursor leader is WANG HAODE. And I should mention there will be three people surnamed Wang in here. It'll maybe a little bit confusing. WANG HAODE is the earlier leader. Wang Ciguang is the current leader, and Wang Yuanshan is an author who happens to be his son. Okay? And I want to get to my main theme, which in the last 5 minutes is that how important leadership is in establishing this new group and throughout Yiguandao history, but especially in the development of Maitreya Great Dao. So I'm kind of saying that you may have all the conditions for a new religion, but if you don't have activists, committed, and courageous leaders, it won't happen. So by leadership, I'm not talking about only charisma. I'm also talking about measurable skills, a complete skill set, which includes strategy, negotiation, the ability to cultivate followers, and to have vision. So I'm pretty confident, and this is my larger purpose, is to study Yiguandao leadership. I'm pretty confident there is an Yiguandao leadership style, one that draws on Chinese culture, even as it positions itself in opposition to some aspects of Chinese culture. So quick note on the title. Great Way of Maitreya is my original title. That's how it's written in the schedule. But Maitreya Great Dao is how the group writes their name. So I figured I should follow their way of writing, 弥勒道道 in Chinese. And for people who don't know, T-A-O is pronounced Dao. It's just the older way that it was written in many, many historical texts. But it's better to pronounce it Dao. That's my take on this. So I'm going to call on Wang Yuanshan. I think I wrote the Chinese wrong here. Wang Yuanshan, or Yuanshan. His recent book, 2009, The Religious Feature of Maitreya Great Dao. This is the first scholarly length investigation of the group. He's a scholar, as well as the son of the current leaders. He includes a lot of very useful Yiguandao scholarship, but he doesn't quite escape from insider perspective. So I personally did field research in 2 temples that were part of this same network. At the time, they were called Tian Dao, which means the way of heaven. And this is one of the many terms for Yiguandao, one of the many labels. Tian Dao and all these labels are terms of contention. Argumentation over labels and periodization is one way that the Yiguandao groups compete with each other. In the end, though, legitimacy always comes down to the question of who embodies the Dao, the true way. From the perspective of Chinese history, this kind of argument echoes political struggles for Tianming, the mandate of heaven, which I think many of you have heard of. In fact, all Yiguandao's groups claim to have Tianming. And this makes them, by default, political players. So we're talking ideologically high stakes here. Okay, so quick some leadership and some background on Yiguandao leaders. Yiguandao originally grew from a cluster of temples, again, in Shandong, which was just mentioned by Gordon, in the newly industrial cities of Jining and Jinan in northern China. Under the leadership of Zhang Tianran and his partner wife, Sun Shuzhen, pictured here on the right, The movement spread very quickly throughout urban China. It continued to grow even during the Sino-Japanese War. After the war, the network was perceived as a threat by both of the parties in the Chinese Civil War. Zhang died, he was imprisoned for a while, then he died in 1947. And with the communist victory in China in 1949, the future looked pretty bleak for Yiguandao. In fact, Yiguandao was the major heterodox group that was targeted in the 1953 campaign against Huidaomen, sects and secret societies. Yiguandao leaders were systematically arrested in what was one of the most thoroughgoing suppressions of a religious group, I think, in anywhere in the 20th century. Yiguandao was eliminated as a social presence in mainland China. But against the odds, the movement survived outside China, or mainland China. Dedicated missionaries went out, often sent from the wealthiest urban temples. Many of them followed the nationalist government and refugees who escaped to Taiwan. Yiguandao, of course, was not alone. Leaders from all the major faith traditions went to Taiwan. But what perhaps sets Yiguandao missionaries apart is their fantastic success. Yiguandao in Taiwan will turn Taiwan into an engine of religious growth. There are many reasons for this, and I won't go into them to save some time, but by the time martial law was lifted in 1987, Yiguandao was a widespread presence in Taiwan. Today, as all of you are, I'm sure know, Taiwan is an open democratic society with a variety of legal religious actors. Yiguandao followers, according to government statistics here from 2005, constitute 3.5% of the total population, around 850,000 people. Those same statistics list another category, the Maitreya Great Dao, who make up 1.1%, around 250,000 adherents. The balance of this paper will focus on how Maitreya Great Dao came to separate itself out. So as I mentioned, the group I studied in the 1990s still called itself Tian Dao, the way of heaven. It formerly called itself Xian Tian Da Dao, the great way of former heaven. Okay, for scholars, all these labels are a complication. And while Yiguandao label is generally accepted by scholars today, that's the term we generally use, many of the groups themselves don't accept this name. After the anti-Japanese war, when the movement came under sustained fire for collaboration in China, the association with the name Yiguandao was, in fact, seen as a liability. So many of the groups started to use the term Tiandao from that point. Another very important element in Yiguandao history is lineage. The ultimate claim of legitimacy for any group is a connection with the distant past. So how has Yiguandao done this? Well, they have posited a DAOTONG. It's a type of lineage string stretching from prehistory, okay, the founding person in the world, in the universe, to the present. Okay, this DAOTONG, is separated into 3 periods, and other groups use the same periodization, called the green yang. Some people say green sun, the translation. I prefer to say yang. Green yang, red yang, and white yang periods. Okay? By developing its Daotong, Yiguandao was able to associate itself with most of the heroes in Chinese culture. You name it, Laozi, Confucius, the Buddha, they're all in there. All told, there have been a total of 64 patriarchs or holders of the Dao in these 3 groupings. Our current period is the White Yang, which dates, there are again different dates given. Some say from 1905, which is when the 17th patriarch took over. Some say 1912, which is when Republican China was founded, and there are other dates. Okay, so very quickly, let me just run through some key events. Huang Dewei, he founds the Xian Tian Dao, the way of former heaven. Yao Hetian founds Yiguandao as a secret learning. It's not openly taught, it's passed from master to disciple. I'll skip Wang Jueyi. In 1886, Maitreya is incarnated as the 16th patriarch, Liu Qingxiu, who formally changes the name Yiguandao and comes into the open. So it's openly taught from that point. 1930, the 2 joint patriarchs, take over, assumed the Tianming. And in 1941, the term Tiandao was used for the first time. Zhang dies in 1947. Sun Suzhen arrives in Taiwan in 1954. She dies in 1975. In 1986, Yiguandao General Association is formed. I think I mentioned before, in 1987, Taiwan martial law ended, and many groups became legal at this time. And Wang HAODE formed the Tian'en Mile Fo Yuan. It's the Buddha Hall. Okay, so Wang HAODE is the person I want to turn to now. Okay, so let me see where I am. One thing that Wang Yuanshan does, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, one thing he does is propose the idea of PAN-YIGUANDAO, which is, I think, a very useful way of looking at the different groups. So the development I just related is in this chart, and you can see Pan-YIGUANDAO groups are not mainstream, but some of them, like Xiantian Dadao and the Maitreya Great Dao, are quite similar. And other groups, like the other two listed, the Sacred Teachings and the Way of the Children, are not very similar, because they say there is a 19th patriarch, and all the other mainstream groups say the Dao lineage stopped at the 18th. So there are theological differences here. But anyway, I think this part is great. What I don't agree with Wang Yuanshan on is the role of this person, Wang HAODE. Okay, so he was the leader when I did my field work. Okay, and you can see him on the left burning the incense in a typical Yiguandao ceremony. He was born, again, in Shandong, moved to Taiwan in 1947 with the Kuomintang. He converted in the next year. He was, in 1955, appointed as personal assistant to Sun Suzhen, who's the 18th patriarch, the surviving 18th patriarch. She died in 75, and he immediately started his own temple. He set up sub-temples throughout Taiwan, and it was registered as a legal entity, but not as a Dao, not as a religion. And he died in 1999. Okay, so in a nutshell, Wang called his group Tiandao and Xiantian Dadao, as I've mentioned. But I contend it was for all purposes an Yiguandao group. If you look at ritual, dress, altar arrangement, it was all Xiantian Dao. It was all Yiguandao. All the texts were found in the temples. And in his writing, most importantly, he didn't claim to have a separate identity. He said he had the Dao, which had been transmitted to him directly from Sun Suzhen. And again, he was the personal assistant to Sun Suzhen. So Wang Yuanshan acknowledges that although he continues Xiantian Dao, he thinks it was a separate religion under Wang HAODE. Its historical character was identical with Yiguandao. So in essence, it was Yiguandao. Still, in other Yiguandao circles, he was not very well liked. He was ostracized. There was much discussion about how he had selfishly embraced the mandate. He was charged with taking over the Hong Kong branches, and there was little doubt about the dislike. He was never listed in any directories. Okay, but I don't think that these disagreements in themselves are sufficient. Okay. Similar arguments are found throughout Yiguandao history. There are schisms. They sometimes resulted in new groups. Sometimes they didn't. They were necessary but not sufficient criteria for a new religion. But with his death in 1999, Maitreya Great Dao was registered, and we're dealing with more than just schism. So how did this happen? How did Maitreya Great Dao head out? Well, from the internal point of view, it was just a name change. And Wang Yuanshan interviews one person who said the term former heaven in the previous name was felt to be abstract and too difficult to relate to. At the same time, everyone knew Maitreya came from former heaven. He was all about happiness. He was the happy Buddha, right? He came from former heaven. So he made former heaven come alive. So Xiantian Dao really just means the great way of former heaven. So the great way of Maitreya, great way of former heaven, same thing, different labels. But I think that the change to an NRM was sudden, and it was because of strong leadership. It wasn't a gradual process. It was more than a name change. Okay, so let me tell you, just skip to the current leader. Wang Ciguang is the current leader. He was an acolyte, or major leader under Wang HAODE. He and his wife, who I don't have a picture of, but she played a key role also. They've created a fully fledged NRM out of the mist of, you could say, PAN-YIGUANDAO. So let me just quickly talk about 4 reasons that this happened. First one is ostracism, and I don't want to go into too much, but there definitely was ostracism against this group. But it wasn't at the popular social level. They succeeded in building a strong community. It was ostracism from other Yiguandao leaders. Okay? Plenty of sentiments against him. So once Wang HAODE died, Wang Ciguang took over, and he was ready to take the plunge and develop a separate identity. Okay, so second reason has to do with leadership factors. There are 3 I want to focus on. One I call this intimate caregiving, or in essence, it's a form of opportunism. Of course, caregiving is a traditional value in Chinese culture. But what I've noticed in research is that besides the formal roles in the temples, another figure is very commonly seen, and I call this the caregiver or the intimate. The intimate is the senior leader's personal assistant. She or he is constantly at the senior side. The senior means the senior leader, the qianren. She serves as a combination secretary acolyte. She takes care of all physical needs. At the social level, she handles mundane affairs. She translates, she communicates, she learns how to communicate situations. And if the leader, the senior, is incapacitated, the intimate begins to make decisions on his or her behalf. So, in other words, she may gradually become a power center in her own right. I've seen this happen 2 times. Okay, in one Hong Kong temple, the intimate was a young, very well-bred, educated transmission master, a leader, who served as the aging male senior's intimate caregiver. But the best example of all this is Wang HAODE himself, who, as I said, served as Su Zhan's intimate assistant for 21 years. And during this time, he handled all communications with overseas temples. And you can imagine when he was setting up his own grouping, how convenient that would be when he was negotiating affiliation with all the temple networks outside of Taiwan. Wang, in turn, had his own intimate. When I participated in rituals in his temple in the 1990s, he was already in his 70s. He was accompanied everywhere by Yan Miaoru. They appeared so close, I thought she would be his daughter, but he already had a daughter and it wasn't her. So we can interpret this practice of using an intimate as a transference of the Chinese cultural value of filial piety, xiao, to the temple hierarchy. They become surrogate progeny. But you can also imagine this positions the intimate, and here her husband, Wang Ciguang, as well, to go on and take over the leadership. Okay, a second very important leadership skill, and here you see the 2 leaders in their business person garb, which you don't see this in the temple, but when they're playing outside, when they're negotiating, this would be their image, okay? They had different styles, but they were both excellent at negotiation and relationship building. This is a religious leadership skill that's similar to politicking. In Chinese culture, this is within a huge competency called guanxi making, right? So everyone who knows Chinese culture will understand guanxi is relationships. It happens away from day-to-day temple business. It happens in different locations, but it is essential. In a network such as Yiguandao, you can't survive without active management at the top. Complacency takes over, whole lineages break off. And Wang Ciguang, judging from his results, is able to do that too. So the final leadership skill I want to emphasize is vision. Okay, as I said, the 2 new leaders, including Wang Ciguang, moved very quickly to to, I mean, this is in vision, to set up a new Dao. And it wasn't just a temple, it wasn't a foundation, it was a Dao, it was something different. And they also moved the headquarters very quickly. He took doctrine in new directions, and in general, you can see this as a reflection of strong religious leadership. So today, if you go visit their head office, you'll see monumental buildings in a beautiful setting, surrounded by mountains. There is a 72-foot high Great Maitreya, which simply towers above everything. If you've ever seen it, there's some pictures of the surroundings. 5,000 visitors come every day. This monumentalism is meant to inspire awe, obviously. He also took doctrine into a very intense focus on Maitreya. Of course, the ancient mother is still in the background, but Maitreya is the focus of everything. And here's a quote from Daniel Overmeyer, I'm sure you'll agree. Maitreya is a key player in contemporary Chinese religion. So all this was just the beginning. They also, here's some more pictures of the great Buddha. They set up extravaganzas, musical performances. They set up this loving nature movement, which meets annually, and every temple now has to set up their own branch. He also stopped certain practices like Fuji divination. So these aren't necessarily unique. Many people in Taiwan, many of the religions do monumental temples because of great wealth, I think, and the desire to impress. The choir performances aren't unique to them. Maitreya worship, of course, has been around. But when you put them all together, I think it reflects strong leadership vision. Okay? So let me just cut to the end here. So my differences with Wang Yuanshan are only about timing. Okay, I believe the registration of Maitreya Great Dao in 2001 is the natural starting point for this NRM. In the years before that date, it was still in the greater stream of Yiguandao. Due to the combination of ostracism, as I mentioned, economic development in Taiwan, and far-sighted leadership, the group made the leap to being an independent religion. So finally, what is really happening? I think Wang Yuanshan is reluctant, and he's following his father's influence. I'm just guessing here. He doesn't want to be seen as the person who created a new NRM out of full cloth. He wants to have a predecessor, which is Wang HAODE. He doesn't want to break that link with Sun Shuzhen. So he has not said, I am the founder. And Wang Yuanshan, his son, follows that and is insisting that Wang HAODE was the founder. But I kind of find that hard to believe. Thank you.
Just one question. Time for one short question.
All over, they had existing affiliations all over Southeast Asia and in the States and in Canada and in Europe. So it's going parallel with other Yiguandao groups. Their geographic spread is just as wide.